My boss's son stormed into my office. "Fire her or I'll make you regret it." He couldn't stand I didn't follow his orders. The orders of a 19-year-old spoiled brat. My boss called me in, eyes down. "Claire, I'm afraid I have to." I leaned in. "Check your inbox first." He went deathly pale. My name is Claire, and on April 18th, I learned exactly how dangerous it can be when a spoiled heir thinks the world owes him obedience. It started like any other Thursday morning. I was in my office by 7 a.m., coffee in one hand, organizing the quarterly reports for our biggest client. The same client who had practically saved the company from bankruptcy last year. That's when the door slammed open. Nathaniel Carter, 19 years old, son of our CEO, heir to a company he had never worked a single honest day for. He marched in, designer suit hanging awkwardly on his lanky frame, eyes blazing with the kind of fury only a spoiled child can muster when someone dares tell them no. "You think you can ignore me?" he barked, slamming his fist on my desk. "When I give an order, you follow it." I stayed seated, calm, professional. "Nathaniel, I don't take orders from interns." His face turned red. "I'm the future CEO. You'll regret this." I raised an eyebrow. "Then I'll deal with you when you're actually the CEO. Until then." I gestured politely toward the door. "Please leave my office." I knew brushing him off like that would come back to bite me. I just didn't expect it to be that same night. Let me take you back a few months before that morning, when our CEO, Richard Carter, announced his son would be joining the company for experience. Most of us assumed Nathaniel would spend a few weeks shadowing departments before getting bored and vanishing back to whatever luxury resort he'd crawled out of. We were wrong. Nathaniel was handed the title of Junior Operations Director, a title I'd earned after 5 years of blood, sweat and late nights with no actual qualifications and no understanding of how our company worked, and somehow in his mind, that meant I was supposed to take orders from him. At first, I played along. I corrected his mistakes quietly. I fixed his disastrous proposals before they reached clients. I even covered for him when he missed deadlines. Why? Because I valued my career. Because I believed in this company. And maybe because I thought he'd grow up. I was wrong about that too. The breaking point came 2 weeks before that Thursday morning. Nathaniel barged into my office, tossed a file on my desk and said, "Fire the Johnson team." They annoyed me. The Johnson team, my team, had just secured a $3.5 million contract for the company. "I'm not firing anyone because they annoyed you," I said, keeping my voice calm. His response? "I'll tell my father you refused a direct order." I met his gaze without flinching. "Go ahead." He stormed out. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought his father would knock some sense into him. But I'd underestimated how far entitlement would go. On the night of the annual spring gala, I was representing our international clients, the same division I'd built from scratch over 6 years. Everything felt perfect. The venue glittered. The investors were pleased. For a moment, I let myself believe hard work actually counted for something. And then, my phone buzzed. One text. From Richard Carter. "Claire, please come to my office first thing tomorrow morning." I felt my stomach twist. I barely slept that night. By 7:30 a.m., I was standing in front of Richard's desk. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Claire, I'm afraid I have to." But before he could finish, I leaned in. "Check your inbox first." His face went deathly pale. Because what he didn't know, I'd been documenting everything. Richard Carter stared at his screen like it was a live grenade. The color drained from his face. He clicked once, twice, opened the folder I'd quietly sent him the night before. Inside were 43 forwarded emails. Every single one from Nathaniel. Some were laughable. Some borderline illegal. There was Nathaniel ordering departments to falsify delivery reports. Nathaniel demanding the finance team adjust numbers to make his forecast look good. Nathaniel emailing me directly with gems like, "Just do what I say or I'll make sure you're out." I stood silently, letting Richard take it all in. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, a deep sigh escaping his lips. I had no idea. I folded my arms. "Didn't you?" He flinched. Because the truth was, he had known, at least part of it, but turning a blind eye is easier when it's your golden boy acting out. Easier until the proof lands in your inbox. Richard buried his head in his hands. "Claire, why didn't you come to me sooner?" I kept my voice level. "Because I thought this company believed in merit, and because I didn't want to be the reason your family imploded." He looked up, eyes sharp with something between guilt and fear. "My board can never see this." I gave him a hard look. "I'm not here to threaten you, Richard. I'm here because your son walked into my office yesterday morning and demanded I fire a team that just saved you $3.5 million. And when I refused, he promised to destroy my career." I paused, letting that sink in. "I came here because I won't let a 19-year-old brat treat people like garbage while you look the other way." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the low hum of the air conditioner. Then Richard whispered, "What do you want?" I smiled, just slightly. "I want my career. I want the Johnson team protected. I want this nonsense to stop before it blows up in your face." "And Nathaniel? That's your problem." I left Richard's office with my heart pounding. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about justice. About making sure hard work still mattered. But by Monday morning, I realized Nathaniel wasn't going to let it go. It started with whispers. Emails I was suddenly left off. Meetings rescheduled without me. Budget approvals delayed. The subtle art of corporate sabotage. I caught Nathaniel smirking outside a strategy meeting I'd been excluded from. He actually winked at me. Here's the thing about entitled people like Nathaniel. They think power is a game they can rig. What they never realize is, sometimes the people they try to step on are the ones holding the foundation together. A week later, Richard called me back in. "You're right," he said quietly. "Nathaniel's out of control." I raised an eyebrow. "Good. So you've spoken with him?" Richard looked away. "I tried. He won't listen. He told me if I don't get rid of you, he'll go to the board and cause trouble." I actually laughed. 19 years old and threatening board action? Impressive. Richard didn't laugh. "Claire, I'm afraid I have to suspend you. Temporarily." Just to calm him down. "It's not personal." I stared at him, stone cold. "It's never personal, is it?" He winced. "I'll make it right, I promise." But I already knew. He wasn't going to stand up to his son. He was going to sacrifice me, the person who built his international division. Because it was easier, I nodded politely, and walked out of his office with my head high. But I wasn't defeated, because Richard had no idea. I'd been preparing for this moment for months. Walking out of Richard Carter's office that morning, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I'd learned long ago that in corporate life, loyalty often dissolves under pressure. Especially when family's involved. But what Nathaniel and his father didn't realize was, I wasn't standing alone. Because while they were busy plotting my exit, I'd been building something else entirely. 3 months before Nathaniel stormed into my office, I'd noticed things shifting. Clients were getting nervous. Senior managers were asking strange questions. And several high-level partnerships, ones I had personally negotiated, were suddenly being reassigned. It didn't take a genius to realize Nathaniel was positioning himself. He wanted to control the international division I'd built from scratch. And Richard was letting him. So I did the one thing they didn't expect. I started documenting everything. Every email, every meeting note, every client concern about Nathaniel's behavior. I had a clean, organized record of every reckless decision he made and every cover-up attempt Richard allowed. But I wasn't stupid enough to keep that information to myself. I reached out to 2 people I trusted more than anyone in the company. Marta Chen, our head of compliance, and David Alvarez, our senior legal counsel. Both of them had worked alongside me for years. Both of them had quietly expressed concerns about Nathaniel's behavior. Over coffee, off the record, I laid out everything I had. At first, Marta shook her head. "Claire, this is a career-ending mess." David agreed. "If the board sees this," I met their eyes. "They need to see this. Not for me, for the company." There was a long pause. Then Marta leaned in. "I'm with you." David nodded. "Me too." That's when the real work began. We spent late nights cross-referencing contracts Nathaniel had meddled with. We tracked compliance violations that could have triggered investigations. David drafted confidential memos outlining potential breaches of fiduciary duty. And who could be held responsible. Marta discovered that one of Nathaniel's special projects had nearly put us in violation of international trade laws. Had I not intervened quietly 2 months earlier, the fallout could have sunk the company. By the time Richard called me in to suspend me, I wasn't worried. Because the board wasn't going to hear about Nathaniel's misconduct from me. They were going to hear it from their own compliance and legal departments. But that wasn't all. The final piece of the puzzle was our largest international client, Eastbridge Global Holdings. I'd built that relationship personally, and I knew for a fact they had serious concerns about Nathaniel after a disastrous meeting he'd led without me. So I reached out to Michelle Tan, their head of partnerships. We met for lunch. No pressure. No agenda. But when I casually asked about their plans for future contracts, Michelle gave me a knowing look. "Claire, off the record, if you're gone, so are we." I blinked. "Seriously?" She nodded. "We don't work with companies run by amateurs." That was all I needed. By the time my suspension hit the internal email list, 2 things happened simultaneously. Marta and David submitted their joint report directly to the board, and Eastbridge Global sent a formal letter of concern to Richard Carter, with a not-so-subtle warning about withdrawing future business if leadership changes weren't made. I wish I could say I felt triumphant, but honestly, I just felt ready, because Nathaniel Carter had spent months thinking he could push me out with empty threats and childish tantrums. What he didn't understand was simple. You can't bully people who have nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The official notice hit company-wide email at 9:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. Claire Patterson, administrative leave. Pending internal review. No explanation. No details. Just a cold, sterile sentence announcing that I was, for all intents and purposes, out. But what Richard Carter didn't know, the review had already started, and it wasn't about me. At 10:05 a.m., Marta and David submitted their joint report directly to the board of directors. It wasn't dramatic. No accusations. No finger-pointing. Just cold, hard facts. Nathaniel Carter had attempted to manipulate financial data on multiple occasions. He had issued directives outside of his authority, risking contractual violations. He had interfered with compliance procedures. And Richard Carter, by omission or willful ignorance, had allowed it to continue. The report ended with a simple recommendation. We advise immediate review of leadership accountability and potential breaches of fiduciary duty. By 11:30 a.m., the boardroom was in lockdown. I wasn't there, of course, but Marta kept me updated via text. Richard looks like he's aged 10 years in an hour. Nathaniel tried to blame you. Didn't go well. Board isn't buying it. They want answers. I read every message with a strange sense of calm. I hadn't leaked anything to the board myself. I hadn't gone public. I didn't have to. The truth had its own way of rising. Around 2 p.m., Richard called me. I let it go to voicemail. He tried again. By the third call, I picked up. Claire, I think we need to talk. I let him sweat for a moment. About my suspension? He exhaled sharply. About everything. We met in his office late that afternoon. For once, Nathaniel wasn't hovering in the background. Richard looked hollow. The confident CEO mask was gone. The board wants to meet with you tomorrow morning, he said quietly. I nodded. And? He hesitated. They've asked for Nathaniel's immediate resignation, and for me to step down temporarily, pending review. I didn't flinch. Sounds appropriate. Richard gave me a bitter smile. You really did it. You destroyed him. I met his gaze steadily. I didn't destroy anyone. Nathaniel did that himself. I just refused to cover it up. For a moment, I thought he'd explode. But instead, he slumped forward. You were the best we had. He whispered. I should have backed you. I stayed silent. Because in that moment, there was nothing left to say. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom I'd never been invited to before. 12 directors. Cold eyes. Serious faces. But when I sat down, something shifted. They didn't grill me. They didn't accuse. They asked for my perspective. And I gave it to them. Professionally. Calmly. Backed with facts. I told them about the deals I'd negotiated. The partnerships I'd protected. The risks I'd mitigated that Nathaniel's recklessness had created. I watched as heads nodded around the table. By the end of that meeting, the chairman leaned forward. Claire, we'd like you to consider stepping into an interim leadership role for the international division while we restructure. I could hardly believe it. I wasn't just reinstated. I was promoted, but even as I shook hands and smiled politely, a part of me stayed guarded. Because promotions come and go. Titles shift, power is temporary, but respect? That's earned. And it's the one thing Nathaniel Carter would never get back. 2 weeks after that board meeting, Nathaniel Carter was gone. No farewell email. No announcement. Just gone. I heard whispers he'd been shipped off to manage family investments overseas. In other words, they banished him quietly to avoid scandal. And Richard Carter? He stepped down voluntarily, citing personal reasons. The company's internal memo thanked him for his service and highlighted his commitment to future transition efforts. Corporate speak for, we won't fire you publicly if you disappear quietly. On my first official day as interim director of international operations, I walked past Nathaniel's old corner office. Empty. Just a nameplate lying on the desk. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. Because this wasn't about proving a point. It was about protecting the people who'd been risking their careers under his chaotic shadow. I called my team together for a meeting. No fancy speeches. No victory laps. Just one simple promise. I don't care about titles or last names. I care about work, integrity, and respect. That's how we move forward, together. And for the first time in weeks, I saw real relief on their faces. A month later, Eastbridge Global renewed their contract. Not because we begged them, but because Michelle Tan called me personally and said, we want to work with leaders who know what they're doing. That's you. Other clients followed. Deals started closing again. Stability returned. The company didn't just recover, it started thriving. Then came the final twist. The board invited me for a private dinner. I wasn't sure what to expect. But sitting there, across from people who once viewed me as just another department head, I realized something had changed. They weren't looking at me as a placeholder anymore. They were looking at me as a leader. The chairman spoke first. Claire, we'd like to offer you the permanent role of Vice President of International Operations. Effective immediately. I paused, letting that sink in. I have conditions, I said quietly. He smiled. Let's hear them. And I laid them out. Zero tolerance for nepotism in leadership roles. Transparent accountability standards for all executives. Full authority to build and protect my team. My way. The chairman nodded after each one. Agreed. I signed the contract a week later. Not for the title. Not even for the raise. But because I wanted to make sure no one else would have to fight the same battles I did, just to be treated with basic dignity. And Nathaniel? The last I heard, he was working on some startup in Singapore. Burning through his trust fund and trying to impress investors who saw right through him. Funny how that works. When you build your world on entitlement and fear, it collapses the moment someone refuses to play along. Looking back, I realized something. Nathaniel tried to destroy my career because I didn't follow his orders. Richard tried to sacrifice me to save himself. But neither of them understood the truth about power. Real power doesn't come from titles or threats. It comes from competence, character, and the people who trust you to lead them well. And that's something no spoiled heir, and no cowardly CEO, can ever fake.